Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another exciting day of the statutory review of Copyright Act, and this afternoon, by the way. Today we have with us from the Canadian Dance Assembly, Kate Cornell, Executive Director. From the Copyright Visual Arts, David Yazbek, Administrator. From the Playwrights Guild of Canada, Robin Sokolowski, almost. Executive Director, wait, there's one more harder one coming. De la Société des Auteurs et...
And the Authors Society, Elisabeth Schlüter.
Patrick Lowe, scriptwriter and member of Authors Committee. You will all have up to 7 minutes to make your presentation, and then we will go into a round of questions. And as per, I want to confirm with our vice chairs, we will be saving half an hour to do your motion towards the end. Perfect. Thank you very much. So why don't we get started with Kate Cornell? You have 7 minutes.
Very much. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today on behalf of the Canadian Dance Assembly. I represent the National Service Organization, the Canadian Dance Assembly, and we partner with 10 provincial dance organizations to serve the dance sector, which includes hundreds of companies and schools and individual dancers across the country. As a member of the Focus on Creators group, I am here today to add my voice to the call for fair remuneration for Canadian artists, regardless of artistic discipline. I will conclude my presentation today with 2 recommendations. Copyright, as of course you know, is a key pillar to the creative economy and an essential policy tool for the federal government. It upholds the intellectual property rights of producers and creators while allowing Canadians ready access to the content they rely on for work, entertainment, and most notably, education. Mr. Joly stated, Canada, quote, requires a copyright framework that works well in the context of our fast-paced digital world and provides creators with opportunities to get fair value for their work. Choreography is mentioned once in the Copyright Act under the definitions, and I'm very grateful that it is even mentioned in the Copyright Act, to be honest. This definition of choreographic work is dated and could include reference to choreography for the stage, choreography for site-specific works, and choreography on digital platforms. As some examples. Notably, there have been debates in the media about the use of dance in video games such as Fortnite. Therefore, it is imperative to ensure that definitions in the Copyright Act are relevant and current. After talking with several colleagues in the dance sector, I understand that copyright of choreography and royalties for subsequent performances are dealt with at the contract level. And to my knowledge, there have not been any cases brought forward to the Copyright Board about choreographic works. Unfortunately, the Canadian dance sector is not currently large enough in the position to see multiple performances and remounts of choreography. Therefore, royalties are rarely considered. Remarkably, there have been global discussions about whether or not you can even copyright a movement. In 2011, superstar Beyoncé was accused of borrowing liberally from Belgian choreographer Anna de Keersmaker in her music video Countdown. And you can Google this, it's an amazing comparison. In The Guardian, writer Luke Jennings asserted it would be a hard case to make for plagiarism because works of art reference other works of art. So I'm here today actually not to talk about royalties related to choreography, but instead I want to talk primarily about the use of music in dance. So dance is usually performed in venues with live or recorded music. Live music is very expensive. I would say the majority of my members use recorded music. Large dance companies are paying royalties to composers regularly for recorded music and are very aware of their obligations. But small dance companies are often ignorant and therefore non-compliant. Our colleagues at Resound, who you've heard from already in this study, are aware of the administrative burden on small companies for compliance and are willing to work with dance service organizations like the Canadian Dance Assembly on webinars to educate our members. The Canadian Dance Assembly is working with its provincial colleagues and ReSound to increase understanding and therefore increase compliance. In July 2017, the federal government announced its intention to reform the Copyright Board. The Canadian Dance Assembly fully supports the review and reform of the Copyright Board. The board plays an important role ensuring creators and publishers are remunerated for the use of their work when licenses cannot be reached through negotiation, as of course you know. Additionally, the Copyright Board has an obligation to consult sectors affected by tariffs, and that's what I want to talk about is consultation. In dance, the Copyright Board administers agreements between dance schools and ReSound for the use of recorded music in dance instruction, which is Tariff 6B. They also administer agreements with ReSound for the use of recorded music at venues, which is Tariff 5K. There are also agreements with SOCAN, but I want to talk about ReSound today. My colleagues at the provincial service organizations who work directly with dance studios across the country are very concerned about settlement tariff 6B. The tariff was negotiated in March 2014 between the Fitness Industry Council of Canada and Good Life Fitness and ReSound. So please note in that list there's no dance organization amongst the negotiation. But the tariff applies to dance instruction. The settlement tariff certified by the Copyright Board in March of 2015 is based on a per-class basis, while the original tariff was based on a per-venue basis. This change, combined with a significant increase in the base rate, resulted in a settlement tariff being multiple times higher for dance schools than the original tariff. For example, the studio that my daughter, my 4-year-old, studies at would have used to pay under the original tariff $25 for a venue permit, and now because they have 44 classes a week, they pay $1,100 in a tariff. And what is frustrating about that is that in those negotiations, dance didn't really have a representative at the table during the Copyright Board's review. So the settlement tariff also notably is for recreational instruction, not educational instruction. The majority of dance schools in this country focus their instruction on school-aged children. Therefore, the clarification of the definition of what is an educational institute in comparison to what is recreational instruction could have a significant impact on the fees paid by dance schools. Notably, the Copyright Board supposed in March 2015 that the Fitness Industry Council of Canada could speak to dance instruction when, of course, there are several trade organizations, dance service organizations that could speak to dance. In January 2018, when Tariff 6B was re-examined, there was one provincial dance group that was at the table briefly, the Canadian Dance Teachers Association, but they could not afford to continue in the full proceedings. So I absolutely recognize that the actions of the Copyright Board are not the purview of this standing committee, but I bring up the lack of representation of dance here so that it is in the public record. On behalf of the Canadian Dance Assembly, I want to encourage the committee to focus on the fair, accent on the word fair, remuneration of artists in its review. To conclude, the Canadian Dance Assembly recommends that the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology amends the Copyright Act in these two ways. One, refine the definition of choreography so as to reflect the reality of the profession of dance in 2018. And two, re-examine the definition of an educational institute to consider non-governmental training institutes such as dance schools. So thank you very much for your consideration.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We're going to move to copyright visual arts. Mr. Yazbek, you have up to 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to yourself and the members of the committee for enabling me to take this opportunity to make a presentation to you this afternoon. I'm actually a labor lawyer and a human rights lawyer here in Ottawa, which I say under my breath somewhat, but I've been doing a lot of work with visual artists over the last decade or so, and recently I've become a board member of Copyright Visual Arts, so I'm here in that capacity. We are a nonprofit, artist-run copyright licensing agency. We've submitted a brief to the committee with 3 recommendations that, in our opinion, will directly and significantly affect the livelihood of visual artists in Canada. I'm just going to touch on those 3 recommendations right now. And of course, when everyone's done, I'd be open to any questions that you might have. The three recommendations concern fair dealing, the exhibition right, and the artist's resale right. So first of all, fair dealing. You will have already heard earlier this summer from Access Copyright and other groups representing writing and publishing that the 2012 amendments to the Act introduced an education exemption under fair dealing. But the Act does not specifically define the scope of this exemption. Since then, educational institutions have established their own fair dealing guidelines, which are problematic for visual artists, and they have stopped renewing collective licenses with Access Copyright under the guise of fair dealing. Although individual payments to visual artists are modest, artists rely on them as a regular source of income. Years ago, an artist could pay a month's rent with their annual royalty. Now they're receiving an average of $50 each a year. Over the last 4 years, royalties that artists collectively receive from Access Copyright declined by 66%, from well over $500,000 to less than $200,000. In other countries like the UK, Australia, and Scandinavia, limitations on fair dealing have been written into the law that balances the rights of users and creators, where artists' livelihoods are not at stake. We recommend that similar wording be used here, which does not interfere with collective licensing. Our brief has further details on this, and of course I commend to you the Access Copyright brief submitted in the summer, which also has a detailed analysis. The second issue concerns the exhibition right in 1988. As you all know, the Act includes an exhibition right that allows artists to require payment for the exhibition of their works if the works are not offered for sale or hire. However, public museums and galleries are not legally required to pay artists if their work was made before June 8, 1988, and that was the date on which the exhibition right was enacted and came into force. This date limitation has led to discrimination against senior artists and the estates of deceased artists. Some museums do choose to pay artists for earlier works, but most do not, and without stronger legal rights, senior artists are often excluded from payment while their younger counterparts do not face these issues. In our opinion, there are strong arguments that this discrimination could be a violation of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We therefore recommend that the 1988 date be dropped and that the exhibition right be extended to include all works subject to copyright, that is, the life of the artist plus 50 years. The final recommendation relates to the artist's resale right. The artist's resale right is a proposed royalty that a visual artist should receive each time their work is resold publicly through an auction house or a commercial gallery. If an artist sells or donates their work and then it is later offered for sale again, we are asking that visual artists or their estates receive 5% of that sale price. It's actually a fairly nominal amount. Currently, Canadian artists only get paid on the first sale of their artwork. This royalty would contribute significantly to the financial sustainability of an artist's practice. A writer or a composer gets paid as long as people buy their books or their songs, but visual artists should also be paid if their artworks continue to re-enter the market and are sold again, because they retain intellectual property in their work. The resale right is not a new phenomenon. It exists in over 90 countries around the world. The World Intellectual Property Organization is making efforts to make international adoption of the right mandatory. Currently, it is voluntary for members of the Berne Convention. Last year, CIAGP, which represents visual arts copyright collectives internationally, passed a motion calling on Minister Baines and Minister Joly, when she was still Minister of Canadian Heritage, to adopt the artist resale right and to support the adoption of a universal treaty at WIPO, which is the World Intellectual Property Organization. We would urge you to join an international community that supports artists by adopting the artist resale right. And I should note that in 2011, this committee was supportive of our efforts in this regard and encouraged us to pursue enactment of the artist resale right through a private member's bill, which we attempted to do in 2013, but ultimately was not successful. Thank you for your time, and as I said, I'm happy to try to answer any questions you have later.
Thank you very much. We're going to move to Playwrights Guild of Canada, Ms. Sokolowski.
Thank you for the invitation to come and speak. My name is Robin Sokolowski. I'm the Executive Director of the Playwrights Guild of Canada. an organization that for 46 years has worked to protect and promote playwrights. As someone who has worked for the last 10 years at Playwrights Guild of Canada, I know how challenging it is to both protect the work of Canadian artistic creators, but to also ensure that the work of our artists is made accessible. So thank you. I appreciate your investment of time and consideration on the complexities of copyright, especially within this rapidly changing landscape. I'm here today to provide insight on how artistic content from the perspective of my members, over 900 Canadian playwrights, are impacted by what is currently in place in our copyright legislation. I'll do what my members do best and start with a story. About a year ago, one of Playwrights Guild of Canada's most prominent members, David Craig, was invited into a classroom to discuss his work. David writes plays specifically for young audiences, a genre of theater that, when skillfully crafted, can create an enormous amount of positive change within a young person, amongst those characteristics being a greater sense of empathy and respect for others. So, you can imagine David's dismay when he walked into that classroom to see each student with a photocopy of his entire play in front of them. A play that is published by a Canadian publisher, Playwrights Canada Press, and a play that we at Playwrights Guild of Canada receive government funding for to make sure it is readily available to the public. I share this example with you today to articulate as clearly as I can the inefficiencies that have erupted given the ambiguity contained within our current Copyright Act, namely the uncertainty revolving around one word: education. Education was not defined when it was added as a purpose for fair dealing under the Copyright Modernization Act. This led to the education sector unilaterally adopting their own copyright guidelines. These copying guidelines were recently ruled as unfair in both their terms and application by the Federal Court of Canada. However, the copying practices of the education sector clearly continue to persist. I know you're all well aware of these accounts, but what all of this translates to, what it means to Canadian playwrights, is this. Since 2011, Playwrights Canada Press, the publisher of this book, has seen a decrease in revenue that it receives from Access Copyright by 86%. That's $28,000 in 2012 to $4,000 in 2017. This is a revenue source that is utilized to publish more Canadian plays. Individually, my members have reported to me that a drop in income from book royalties has been catastrophic, an 85% reduction over 5 years, resulting in a loss of income of thousands of dollars. These real-life examples speak to the numbers you've been hearing repeatedly, such as the 600 million pages of copyright-protected content that is being copied for free each year by the education sector. This number does not include content licensed through academic libraries or made available under open access licenses. The 600 million pages that you keep hearing about resembles the pages like the one in this book. We all need to do our best possible jobs in educating the public on the value of the arts and our artists in this country. At Playwrights Guild of Canada, we administer amateur rights licenses to schools that wish to perform our members' plays on their stages. We are finding more and more that we are having to chase down schools that have neglected to seek permission in advance of production. As soon as this is drawn to their attention, schools fulfill contracts retroactively without any difficulty. This is because copyright law gives Playwrights Guild of Canada the ability to ensure its members are paid for the use of their work. However, I bring this to your attention as copyright is clearly slipping from the forefront of people's minds when utilizing the intellectual property of others. There's a number of things that need to be done to generate a thriving environment for both artists and students in this country, many which I feel obligated as the Executive Director of the Playwrights Guild of Canada to see through. However, there are some recommendations, just 2, that I bring forward to you to assist in fostering a healthier environment to create and to learn. First, Playwrights Guild of Canada believes the education category of fair dealing should be removed from the Copyright Act. Leaving this word up for interpretation has led to misuse. The trial judge on the York decision concluded that there is clear evidence that the free copying under the education sector's copying policy substituted for the sale of works. Despite the ruling of the court, the behavior of the education sector remains unchanged. There is simply no justification for treating Canada's artists as uncompensated suppliers. Removing this word, education, saves all parties involved from what seems like the endless litigation that is currently taking place. Our second recommendation would be to promote the return of licensing through collective management organizations such as Access Copyright. As I'm sure you've been made aware of, after the Act was amended in 2012, the education sector throughout Canada, with the exception of Quebec, abandoned collective licenses and stopped paying mandatory tariffs. So, to put it plainly, as a national organization, my members' work continues to be licensed by the education sector in Quebec, while members' work in the rest of Canada is almost completely unlicensed. Creating a solution that provides simple, inexpensive access to copyright-protected works while fairly compensating artists already exists in collectives such as Access Copyright. This solution can easily be promoted by you by harmonizing the statutory damages available to collectives. Right now, only 2 copyright collectives, SOCAN and Resound, can seek statutory damages between 3 to 10 times the value of the tariff. Collectives such as Access Copyright, which is the collective set up to distribute royalties to my members, can now only collect the price of the tariff. Making this change will have a huge impact as it will deter infringement, encourage settlement, and increase judicial efficiencies by reducing the endless litigation that I had just previously mentioned. The measurement of good policy is the well-being of the community. The divisiveness that has been augmented by the changes made to the Copyright Act in 2012 does not make for a healthy community to work, live, and learn in. The recommendations that I bring forward to you today is a win-win for both the artistic creators in this country and the students that they inspire. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Et on va aller aux Sociétés des auteurs et
And now on to the Authors Society. Ms. Schlittler, you have 7 minutes. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for having invited us to appear before your committee for the statutory review of the Copyright Act. My name is Elisabeth Schlittler, and I am the General Delegate for Canada of the Société des auteurs et compositeurs dramatiques, also called the SACD, or Authors Society, and the Société civile des auteurs multimédia. And the acronym will make you laugh, but the acronym of the second society is SCAM. Since I've been saying the scam for 30 years, I'm going to continue to say the scam. I am accompanied by Mr. Patrick Lowe, who's a scriptwriter and a representative of the Authors Committee. With offices in Montreal for the past 30 years, the SACD and the SCAM are 2 societies that manage their members' rights in Canada and across the world for a vast catalogue of dramatic and documentary works. They have been tasked by their author members to negotiate, collect, and distribute royalties. The royalties that are paid by those using their works in audiovisual, radiophonic, and theatrical catalogs. They are 2 collective management society as interpreted in the Copyright Act. The SACD includes authors of dramatic works such as scriptwriters, film directors. We're talking about directors when I say réalisateur rather than producers. It also includes playwrights, choreographers, composers, and stage directors. As to the SCAM, it represents scriptwriters, stage director, film directors, as well as documentary film directors. SCAM represents nearly 2,000 Canadian authors, both francophone and anglophone, which mostly includes scriptwriters and directors of television series, feature films, animations, short films, web and radio series, playwrights, and choreographers. By belonging to the SACD or the SCAM, authors bring us their rights to communicate their works to the public through telecommunications. As an example, the audiovisual catalog of the SACD is composed of feature films such as Decline of the American Empire by Denis Arcand and series such as District 31 by Luc Dion. The SCAM's catalog is made up of documentary films such as Roger Toupin Épicier by Benoît Pilon and Pascal Gélina's Un pont entre deux mondes. In exchange, the SACD promises authors to negotiate license conditions that they will grant to television stations and digital platforms. In Canada, the SACD-SCAM has negotiated a license that covers 6 conventional stations, 20 specialized stations, a pay-for-play station, 5 digital platforms, a radio station, and an agreement for cable rights. thanks to contracts negotiated by the SACD SCAM in France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Monaco with television stations, digital platforms, and its agreements with national author societies, including in Switzerland, Italy, Spain, and Poland, Canadian members are sure to receive the royalties that they've earned and deserve for the use of their works in those countries. The principle of compensation defended by the two societies, including in the European Francophone countries and implemented in Quebec, is quite simple. An author must be linked to the economic lifespan of his or her work and must be compensated for all types of uses made of it. That is the principle underlying our compensation. As such, the collective rights management continues to be indispensable, especially during the digital era. The current review of the Copyright Act must encourage the creation of works and fair compensation of authors by better equipping collective management societies. It's time to counterbalance the many exceptions adopted in 2012 and to remember that this statute is supposed to be protecting authors. The government must stop the pillage of authors' works' intellectual assets. It must send a clear message that all work deserves to be compensated and that nothing should be obtained for free. In our brief, tabled in May, you will find the details of our recommendations, but here is a quick overview of those recommendations. First of all, we recommend that the legal fuzziness around the issue of rights ownerships when it comes to audiovisual works be clarified. In our opinion, it is necessary to specify that these are collaborative works involving several co-authors and that we have to consider presumed ownership that would benefit both scriptwriter and director. This clarification would allow us, among other things, to negotiate with Canadian stations and platforms the compensation of our members who have been deprived of such compensation so far. Like most of the countries with a private copying regime, we recommend that the Canadian regime of private copying be extended to audiovisual works and that it also apply to all formats used by consumers to reproduce them. Extending this regime broadening the regime to include audiovisual would correct an impossible situation to justify to authors and sister societies with whom we have reciprocal agreements. We recommend that, like the European Parliament, that all digital intermediaries contribute to the funding of cultural content, since they are transmitting it or providing to their subscribers access to it and thus profiting from them. We salute the Minister of Finance's undertaking to find fiscal solutions to e-commerce, but we request that all taxes being collected by national companies are also collected by foreign companies, and that part of that money is set aside to fund Canadian culture. Finally, we are delighted that Canada has committed in the USMC agreement, United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, to amend or to extend the Canada copyright to 70 years in order to reflect the prolonged use of these works and to bring Canadian law legislation into alignment with modern foreign legislation. On behalf of our members, we thank you for your attention and we would be pleased to answer your questions. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Off with Ms. Seether-Chavannes. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to start off with Ms. Cornell. How are you? So you started off by saying that you're going to focus on the music component of dance and not so much on the choreography component. But I wanted to help you increase the word count of choreography in the act. So I'm going to focus on that part of it. And I'm not aware of the Beyonce example, but I'm going to use an example from 2018, September 2018, a Forbes article, which focused on video games and epic video games. And if I could just quote the article, if you don't mind. So according to Chance the Rapper, one of the first artists to speak on this issue, Fortnite, which uses dances in its video games, is unfairly profiting off of already named and recognizable dances without giving credit or compensation to creators. Quote, Fortnite should put an actual rap songs behind the dances that make so much money using the emotes. He stated, Black creatives created and popularized these dances but never monetized them. Imagine the money people are spending on these emotes being shared with artists that made them. Of course, as many of us know, Epic Games made over $1 billion since it went online in September of last year. It's free to play, so they make most of their money through these emotes that I'm sure my son knows about, but I don't quite know what they are. My first question to you would be, you spoke about the definition being dated.
Yes.
How would we update the definition of choreography to fit sort of this digital context, the Beyonce example? And how would you amend or change the Copyright Act to correct what I've just described for dancers and choreographers, particularly in the digital context?
Thank you so much. So I think by just broadening the definition of dance to include digital platforms and possibly referencing video games, you could get at this specificity that you're talking about. And I'm so glad you brought it up because there's definitely attention to the fact that this is falling on racial lines and that choreographers from the Black community are not getting recognition for this work. And right now, there are American choreographers in Fortnite. And again, I don't know much about the game, but people are spending on average $87 on movements that they can buy to do in the game. And so that's money that should be recognized to choreographers. The challenge in it is currently you can copyright a piece of dance, a full choreographic work, but you can't copyright a movement. And so the question is, when is it a dance? When is it a full entity? And when is it just a movement? So that clarification would need to be addressed within the definition.
Excellent. And my second question, I'm going to split my time, Mr. Chair. Second question to Mr. Yazbek. Yeah. You spoke about the resale right, and you made good arguments for the resale right. How do you respond to the counter argument that says resale is unnecessary because artists can benefit from increased value of previous works by raising the price for subsequent work?
Well, the short answer to that, it's like the exhibition right. Okay, 1988 is a cutoff date, and artists generally don't benefit from being paid for the exhibition of their works prior to then, except for a few organizations that do it voluntarily. And so it is with the resale right. Unless there's a law that requires this, then artists will not benefit. The fact of the matter is that organizations that are out there engaged in reselling works of art are not interested in paying this, and so they need to be compelled to do that. And remember, it's 5%. It's actually a very nominal amount, and if you look at the total cost of some of these exchanges, it's very minimal, and yet it has a huge impact on the life of an artist, particularly a financial impact.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we got 3 minutes. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. I'm going to focus the remaining 3 minutes or so on Mr. Yazbek. I have a question on the impact of the digital era that we are going to and the impact that it has on the visual art. As you may have heard, that the recent unveiling of the new Rembrandt portrait created by a combination of facial recognition software, machine learning algorithm, and 3D printing now has created a new artwork under the artificial intelligence. So the question I have is, what do you think is the impact, and who really is the owner or the author or the creator? Is it the machine? Is it the person who wrote the algorithm? Is it the 3D printer? Who's going to own it?
Thank you for that. I'm sure there are a half a dozen PhD students writing a thesis on that subject right now, and I don't mean to be facetious. It's a very complex issue, and I'm not sure that I'm in a position to give you a full response to that point right now. I think that certainly, with one of the challenges we face with the digital reproduction of art is tracking the ownership and tracking how people get paid, et cetera. And I think a lot of organizations are working on improving that. But I mean, beyond that, there's sort of blockchain technology that might assist in that regard, which I've heard the term, but I couldn't give you a very.
In your opinion, should even such art or such work be even enter the public domain if the owner is the question of who's the creator or who's the owner is still being discussed?
That's a good question, and I'd want to think about that to get back to you on that. Yeah.
Okay, is anybody on the panel has some comments or? Nope. Okay.
Thank you.
I'll give you 40 seconds back.
I will take those 40 seconds and we'll store them for later. Mr. Albus, you have 7 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for being here today, specifically sharing some of the viewpoints. Ms. Cornell, I just want to thank you for your analysis. I actually used to run a martial arts school, and next door was a ballet school. And so absolutely some of your comments when it comes to tariff and the lack of representation. I do think that not having representation in the discussion around the tariff 6B is necessary because the model that ballet schools operate on is much different than a commercial gym would offer, particularly if you look at one like Good Life Fitness or whatnot, just at a scales of difference and how they deal with things. So your points are very well taken on that. Now, just in regards to choreography, I do realize that there's a very valid point when you do have an artist like Beyonce that's utilizing work and without giving due credit. And of course, that does come out in the wash, so to speak, because with the internet now, we can analyze something and judge for ourselves. The question I would have is just being from someone in a martial arts background, I do know martial arts instructors are very keen to commercialize where they can. Particularly, we're taking ancient disciplines, repackaging them, and then calling them our own. And so there's some copyright that's available in terms of trademarks and whatnot to ensure that someone can market their so-called new discipline in a new way. But at the same token, you're taking movements that have been around for thousands of years. And so how do you repackage and repurpose and then claim royalties on it? I just think that you would rob what we've seen in martial arts, where now people from right across the world can compare different techniques and whatnot. And if we started allowing people to copyright movements for dance routines, I'm pretty sure we would soon see people start to claim copyright for their own martial art disciplines. What do you have to say in regards to that concern?
Well, again, as I said to Ms. Cesar Chavons, it's about the line between a movement, and I did the example of jazz hands, and an actual complete work of art with a recognized author attached to it. So I think that I'm not necessarily saying that we need to copyright individual movements and give royalties to individual movements, but I think that there needs to be a recognition of, particularly in the case of Canadians, the work that they're doing, and if their work is being appropriated. I'm not saying that they need to necessarily be paid for that, but they need to be acknowledged as part of involved in part of this creation. Because as I said, the quote from The Guardian, artists borrow from artists all the time. That's the nature of creativity.
Well, and in many cases, certain styles, I've been taught, someone will say that's been incorporated by someone else. And I just see that they're being, where does it end?
Exactly.
And again, I think that we sometimes need to look at that what we operate. I'm sure people in the dance movement would say that that various artists at various times inspired them, but their work is new.
Yes.
But many other people would say, well, you're just adding your own flourishes to it. So I just see that as a very dangerous slope.
It's very subjective.
Because, again, it's the human body, it's art in the moment, and I don't think anyone should be able to say that movement is mine. Or that series of movements is mine, because that's basically martial arts to a large extent. Now, going to specifics on your, I actually had a question more. We've heard some testimony that artist groups would like extensions of copyright for works used in films and movies. Now, sound recordings that are used in those properties have repeat broadcasts, require repeat royalties. That's what some people have said. Right now, sound recordings, they're paid once for the actual work, and then if it's rebroadcast in a movie theater or streamed on a platform, that's separate. Now, a representative of the Movie Theater Association who opposed to that warned that this could extend to dance performances as well. He said, currently a producer pays a fee up front, and the choreographer is not permitted to exercise remuneration when the work is incorporated into a film. In essence, once a creator sells that work for a film, they're not entitled to more royalties later. Would your association support changes to law to require royalties to be paid to choreographers when that work is broadcast?
Yes, but I would really like to hear Patrick and Elizabeth's opinion on this, because this is certainly not my area of expertise.
Nous, c'est très simple.
It's quite simple. For the SACD, every type of use made of a work should be subject to copyright compensation, whether it's used once, twice, 3 times, or 4 times, no matter. Each time, the copyright royalties should be paid. You're talking about a film, for example, that's shown on a theater screen, and then after that, it may be shown again on television, at which point the copyright royalties are paid once again. And if it's then shown on a telecommunications platform or some kind of digital platform, then, in our opinion, the author should continue to be compensated for each subsequent use. I believe that Patrick, as an author, will be able to tell you more.
Complexity of tracking that, and also it may push away a lot of legitimate activity that is being filmed here in Canada, where you have artists, dancers, composers, et cetera, and sound producers that are compensated for that work. But if directors and producers feel that there's going to be an ongoing, what they would consider liability, and I do recognize many of you would represent that as say, well, that's work that we've done. But again, that's not how the current act reads, and that's not how the practice is in that community. People are remunerated for the original work, not for the rebroadcasted. So is that something we're looking at here as well? Because to me, that's where the complexity comes in. And when things get too complex, oftentimes people make business decisions that aren't good for the ecosystem long term.
Well, there's no problem in Quebec as to where all the rights paid from the channel or anyone who's n'importe qui diffuse une œuvre au Québec.
Anyone who's broadcasting at work in Quebec, we've got contracts with specifications in them. We protect our copyrights and receive royalties, and we negotiate very good. The SACD negotiates very good sums for the use of these words.
Witnesses is then in their space where they're operating outside of Quebec. In some cases, they may write into the contract between the company, the producer, and the person that's producing the work, whether it be a choreographer or a sound producer, to be paid. But again, we're talking about the status quo right across the country. And so that's why I'm asking that C is because if we make it mandatory that for every time something is streamed on a platform like Netflix or like Crave TV, that there's going to be an extra cost, that may make a decision for future work to not be done in Canada. And those are questions that I have as well, because then we don't have an ecosystem where people can find work. So I do appreciate that there seems to be a different way of doing it in Quebec, but we're talking about right now, right across the country.
Come back to that. We're going to move to Mr. Massey. You have 7 minutes.
Well, you can finish the question.
I was going to add that at Playwrights Guild of Canada, in terms of ensuring access, we're being proactive in terms of our work being done on a digital platform, because right now what's happening is a lot of playwrights are having their work filmed to make it more accessible beyond the stage. And so we went ahead and talked to a lot of agents and a lot of different organizations on an international scale to have that conversation to ensure that when that play is filmed and it's distributed in a different way, that the playwrights continue to be paid. So I think that we all need to work together a little bit better to ensure that we're putting the tools in place to ensure that we can make the work accessible, because I think it has more to do with ensuring that the copyright can be obtained, the licenses can be obtained, not necessarily the cost of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to move to the, I do play Fortnite, so I'm familiar with emotes, that and other games. I mean, and it's kind of an interesting thing that's kind of emerged with regards to it. If you're not familiar with emotes, they usually take 2 to 5 seconds, depending upon which game you're playing, but they're not usually germane to the game. They're part of an expression component that people actually do and use to play online amongst themselves in often standby rooms or in waiting period times before the game, or it's activity to express yourself during the gameplay if you want to add that. So it's not only just Fortnite, but it's there's hundreds of games that have emotes. But the question is this: that I have is like where is it? I guess where's the line drawn for any of these things where you and they are purchasable, but often it's game credits. Some of those game credits, and we ran into a problem to some degree, and it was cleaned up by Battlefront, where they were, it almost became like a lottery. It was criticized for loot boxes and other things like that when you purchase upgrades for weaponry, for costumes, for emotes. Some of the emotes are dance moves. Others are expressions, are talking. They're phrases. They're very common in pop culture, whether they be from movies or whether they've been from other types of things that have become just generally acceptable in terms of use. And so, kind of where do you have any idea as to where the line would be drawn on that? Because and how the compensation would take place? Because again, you could even you don't have to spend money to get emotes. You can play the game and you get online credit currencies for that. So how would you compensate for that? And if it's a 3 to 5 second thing that's also done in the social context of using the game, not the gameplay itself, how do you restrict that? That would be similar to, in the virtual world, these rooms and elements where the emotes are used most prolifically is the same as if we were in the room here and you did a thumbs up. There's everything from dance moves that go back to cultural expressions, whether it be Slavic or Russian and other types of Eastern European, kicking out your feet type things, to skateboarding things that were kind of, come about the heydays of Tony Hawk and the types of moves that they did with regards to the emergence of that culture. So how do you quantify these, and would you distinguish the difference between using them in, again, a virtual setting before the game, which is when you're actually you're communicating and you're part of that culture where you know that all your expressions are monitored and your expressions are shared, which would be no different than the real world?
To my knowledge, no jurisdiction is currently offering royalties on these movements, these emotes that are happening in video games. I believe the point I was trying to make is that the definition of choreographic work needs to be a little bit more flexible and not so much focused on narrative ballet in the Copyright Act, so that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 50 years from now, there is the potential to have this conversation when Drake creates a phenomenal dance sensation and suddenly copyrights it, and then we go down this slippery slope. We're not there yet.
Yeah, and I don't know even how I would side to think about it, but it's like there's the Rocket Rodeo where it's the guy who's riding a rocket that goes, and it reminds me of an older movie which I can't remember from the 1950s or 60s. It's where I forget the actor who gets on the bomb and rides it down, the nuclear bomb. Somebody might remember it. It might be, yeah. At any rate, so it goes back. And that's what we're talking about, though, is that it's triggered me. The emotes triggered me the remembrance of that movie, and I'm sure there's probably some similarity. But at the same time, is like, how do you quantify that? Because now, is there any quantification? Is that emote, if it is recognizable, that somebody might actually then lead it to the musician or the choreographer or the artist who did it, that might lead to a purchasing of their song or their dance or whatever. How do you square that kind of process? I'm just curious. What's the thought from the industry itself?
When a Beyonce liberally borrowed from De Keersmaker, the industry kind of celebrated. It was lots of attention to kind of esoteric contemporary dance, and more interest in probably exactly what you said. More tickets purchased, more focus on that artist.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, it's really is. It's new. It's really interesting in terms of, and there is. I mean, it's. I think there's a bigger in the video game industry. There's a bigger. Once again, these are packages, part of loot crates that include, because it's part of a social identity that you create online. It's everything from the weapons you use to the clothes that you wear to the expressions that you have. So real quickly though, I don't have any more time. That's it. Well, I've probably got time for about 6 emotes, but I won't use them.
Thank you very much. I have a strange urge to go out and play a game now. I feel like I'm being left out. We're going to move to Mr. Longfield. You have 7 minutes, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks for all the presentations today. I'm going to start with Ms. Cornell. The Guelph Dance Festival just had their 20th year. It's part of the Fab Five festivals that we celebrate different arts and culture in Guelph. And I think of the small festivals like that and the performers within those festivals. How would they normally go about copyrighting what they've created and what they're putting onto public display? Is it through doing a video of themselves, or what's the mechanism for protecting their works?
Right. There isn't much currently, to be honest, and I absolutely adore the Guelph Contemporary Dance Festival and lived in Guelph for a couple of years, so I'm really glad that you brought it up. So a contemporary dance artist or choreographer company would go into a contract with the festival, for example, to present the work. And if the work becomes a success, and in Canadian dance, that means we get to see it in 2 different cities, maybe 5 shows. So we're really talking about small scale here. That means that everything is decided on a contract basis with that presenter, and then if another presenter wants to purchase it, then and let's say it's going to be performed by different dancers, and maybe in a slightly different context, there is a very, very small chance that a royalty could be paid, but really we're only seeing royalties being paid 99% of the time in ballet. So that example in contemporary dance really doesn't happen very much.
So you might have just answered my follow-up question is with Indigenous dance and whether Indigenous people are able to protect what they've had for centuries.
Right. Well, to my knowledge, and I am certainly not an expert in Indigenous dance, that is more of a verbally passing on the legacy of a dance, and there are knowledge keepers who keep those dances, and it's quite a different system.
Great, thank you. And I'm sharing my time with Mr. Lametti to wherever the chair is. I'm going to go over to Ms. Sokolowski. On your website, you talk about the 3 lenses that you use: promotion, protection, and pluralism.
Yes.
The protection piece is what we're talking about today, and developing mechanisms. Is there an example of a mechanism that you've developed that is being used, or an area that legislation could help to cover, other than what you've mentioned in your presentation today?
Playwrights Guild of Canada, its core activity is a triennial contract, a professional contract it has with the Professional Association of Canadian Theatres, and in that, the foundation and the reason why that contract, those standard agreements continue to have hold any weight is because of the copyright legislation that's currently enacted, and we are able to we've been able to negotiate 10% royalty for of the box office for any time that a play is produced on stage, which is actually in envy by other countries.
Right. So that protects the smaller people again that might not have otherwise have access to getting the protection.
Yes. Yeah.
And that we heard that in a previous testimony that was one of the big issues that's out there.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Ms. Schlittler, on the European side, we've talked a little bit in a previous meeting about the EU standard that's coming through, Chapter 13. It sounds like you've got more experience with EU, and whether we have more to learn from them, or is what they're doing something we should be looking into in more depth?
Là, je vais vous décevoir.
Well, I'll probably disappoint you, but because I mainly look after Canada and Quebec. So I do have a relationship with the SACD in France, but I can't really tell you what's going on in Europe. I just know I have a general overview, but my concern, my territory of concern is Canada. So I can tell you, anything I can tell you, you probably already know. The decisions they've made about digital copyright in the digital platforms and so forth. But it is an agreement that has to be ratified in January, but I have no idea how it will be applied. Talk to me about Quebec and I can answer all kinds of questions.
Thank you. My question's for Ms. Sokolowski. In your initial example, do you know the school board in question of your playwright going in?
TDSB.
TDSB. I have seen a number of the fair dealing policies in a variety of school boards and universities, colleges across Canada. I don't think there's a single one that says you can copy a whole work.
No.
The example you've probably given is of at least of a copyright violation, and,
Yep.
and most school boards and universities will put into place a group that works with teachers. It's also quite possible that they actually will pay the fee, and your author won't know it until the end of the year when he or she gets a check from the collective society, because it won't be itemized. So I wanted, and I just want for the record to say that there actually is a fair bit of certainty with respect to the various standards for educational fair dealing. In fact, it was Copyback and Access Copyright that put forward these guidelines in the 1990s, 2000s in the posters that they had about photocopying machines. and in fact, they're quite similar to what you now see in the university, college, and school board fair dealing policies.
So I brought that example forward for a couple of reasons. First, to share the atmosphere that is currently, we feel, is currently happening within the education sector, that it's a slippery slope. So
Is that not misleading to say that using that example? Because the example led us to believe that you could copy a whole work under fair dealing policies, and that's actually not the case in any
That's very true. So yes, under the
Canada.
education's copying guidelines, 10% or a whole chapter. But if this play was in an anthology, they could potentially photocopy the entire thing. So under those guidelines that have been created by the education sector, they could indeed copy the entire play.
Right.
Under their
Access
guides.
Copyright did have a role in developing those guidelines.
Which is why
they were templates.
Yes, but the fact that the tariff is currently not being paid is excluding the fact that is all of a sudden those rights holders are not being paid for the use of their work, because the tariff is not currently being paid, because the work is being copied under those copying guidelines that has been created by the education sector.
But the education sector is purchasing, as you know, a variety of other kinds of materials, including in all likelihood copies of that play in question.
Certainly, yes, they are purchasing it. But what we're finding, because Playwrights Guild of Canada has a bookstore called the Canadian Play Outlet, so they will purchase one copy of the play digitally, and then they won't purchase any preceding licenses for additional copies for that play. So that's happening.
If they purchase a digital copy of the play, they're probably purchasing a license to use the play.
Nope, they're purchasing one copy of the play, and there's definitely an option to buy from us several copies to license it, to photocopy it, and they are not. So that's what's happening currently right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to move on to Mr. Chong. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to talk about textbooks, and Madame Sokolowski, about the whole issue of textbooks. I think it's clear that there has been a precipitous drop-off in educational publishing revenues, both from the evidence that I've read from witness testimony that we've had in front of this committee, but also some of the research that our analysts have done as well. It's pretty shocking how much the educational publishing sector has been affected by the 2012 copyright law. And you mentioned 600 million pages being copied without remuneration for authors. There's been the court case with York University that still has to be put into effect. And so you combine all those things, and it paints a pretty clear picture that the 2012 changes that included education under fair dealing have had a pretty profound impact on the industry. And I think your recommendations and those of other witnesses are pretty clear, to remove education from the fair dealing provisions in the law. So I wanted to dig a little deeper into this whole textbooks, what's going on. I was shocked to find out that our local school board no longer purchases textbooks for high schools. I'm just completely floored. Personally, I don't know how you go through high school without a textbook. I've got 3 young children in school, and in primary school they got handouts, and they end up at home at the bottom of their backpacks, combined with the dribbles of drink boxes and running shoes and sweaty gym clothes and all that stuff, and trying to make sense of it all sometimes is frustrating, right? I went through school with textbooks, and always kind of those were the core of how I learned. And so I was astounded to find out that the local school board, and apparently it's not just restricted to our local school board, it's across many school boards across the province, are no longer purchasing textbooks. And then I come to this committee and I find out about including education under fair dealing and the precipitous decline. And so I've been thinking about this for a number of weeks. And I guess the first question I have is the secondary and post-secondary sector not purchasing textbooks because of the costs? Or is this a new fad that they're embarking on? In other words, what is driving this? Obviously, the loophole or the change to the 2012 law allowed them, and their interpretation thereof allowed them to not purchase as many textbooks as they did prior to the 2012 change. But setting aside that change in law, what is driving this precipitous decline in purchasing of textbooks in high schools and universities? Is it to reduce costs for students in the system, or is it because of a fad that we don't need textbooks and we'll just assemble multimedia online materials and that's how we'll educate students?
Well, I don't want to speak on behalf of educators because I'm not, but I would certainly say that looking at a course pack, if you go through it, there are several Canadian authors who are included in that course pack. They have not been compensated for the work in those course packs and haven't received any royalties from the work in those course packs.
So let me ask you this. Okay, so I went to U of T.
Yep.
And we got course packs for certain courses that were provided by the professor. You'd go to the library, the bookstore at St. George and College Street, or one of the local photocopy shops, and you would get this course pack. Mm-hmm. At that time, were the authors of those articles remunerated for those course packs?
Yes.
And are they today?
In our opinion, and the research that has been done, no.
Okay. And so what do you think is driving this precipitous decline in revenues? Is it cost savings, or is it a new fad in education where people are moving away from textbooks and using online materials and other multimedia materials to
Well, it boggles my mind as well, and I think at the level of education, we should be encouraging the growth of knowledge. I think otherwise it's going to be on a steady decline in terms of the quality of the work that is being provided to our students. So I don't have an answer to you because I'm not coming from that perspective. Yeah. But I would say that there is also this certainly something that's happening that I am concerned about representing artists, that there's an entitlement for free content and that everyone should have access to it. And access doesn't necessarily mean free. Mm-hmm. So I think we just need to all work together better to find ways of ensuring access is available so that those rights can be obtained. I don't think it's a matter, I would like to think that it's not a matter of cost. I think that there's the model of iTunes, I think proves the fact that if you make something available that's quick, that you can just click a button, then people are willing to pay for it. Yeah. So that's the optimistic side of myself hopes for that.
We're going to move on to Mr. Sheehan. You have 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. And Mr. Longfield began to ask a question I was going to ask about First Nation dance as we're pursuing how we deal with First Nation copyright, because we haven't done a good job with it in the past, and we're trying to wrap our heads around it. And we know that there was some examples of some various groups that are more susceptible to issues, and one of them would be the First Nations. And you think about it, back in black and white TV days, there were a lot of First Nation dances being used in various westerns and whatnot, that there would absolutely be no compensation or permission asked for as well. So appreciated your your comments as we delve into that. And we do have some really good dance people as well. Richard Kim and Sault Ste. Marie, who is world renowned. Tanya Kim's the sister, and there's a lot of other artists. But one of the things that I have for questions for all of you is we talked about different forms of technology that has been thrust upon us into different situations. And when we were discussing the photocopier, I mean, that used to be a new technology for a gray-haired guy like me before, that could be utilized in a way to photocopy entire volumes of works, whereas it was never possible before. And we saw a lot of that happening in the past. I think more and more there's more policies and more items and laws associated with that nowadays. But with the new technologies, the Spotify's, Google, a number of other, Apple, and whatnot, could you describe how that has affected your organizations, and is it better now or worse for compensation for your particular groups? So, anyone want to start?
Here in Quebec, in our system, we don't. You're talking about iTunes and Netflix, especially, or
anything, any one of those new platforms that are on the internet. Yes.
Yes.
Écoutez, je vais.
I'm going to help Patrick a little bit. Technology, as such, is not the issue for a collective rights group. The point is having access to legislation that will allow us to be able to negotiate with those that hold the technology and control it. So in Europe, we have agreements with Netflix. We have agreements with other platforms such as iTunes. Technology, it's in and of itself, is not an issue. What we need is legislative leverage that will empower us to negotiate with all of these new owners or inventors of new technology. When we have that lever, we'll be able to do anything. So earlier, as someone was referring to new platforms that are broadcasting a work for a collective rights management, it's always possible to go and collect royalties. So it's not an issue for us. Now, I may seem a little pretentious in saying so, but that's really how we see things. Anything is possible if you help us and equip us to do what it is we need to do. Thank you.
Anybody else like to comment on that? David, I have a specific question for you. And when you mentioned about there was a charter challenge that was in place based upon senior artists, as you called them. Where is that charter challenge? Is it just being thought of? Is it in the process? And what are you basing your argument on? If you want to delve into it, it would be helpful for us.
Sure. There's no actual legal challenge on the go. It's just a thought or a consideration or analysis. The essence is that the legislation clearly draws a distinction between artists whose works predate 1988 and whose works don't. That on its face may not be considered to be discriminatory, but the fact of the matter is that it is highly likely and it's logical that works created before 1988 are more likely going to be works of older visual artists. And so, as a result, they are. This is an arbitrary line, and it's actually probably, and lawyers don't like to be absolute like this, but it's probably one of the most arbitrary lines you can draw. There's a date that's fixed in 1988, and if you created something before that, you're out of luck. And most of those people are likely to be older, and so that's why. Or it'll be their estates that are losing out on that benefit as well.
Thank you very much.
You.
That's it. Okay.
Thank you very much. Mr. Albus, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll actually pick up there with Mr. Yazbek on exactly that. This artist resale right, it's not a new idea. Obviously, it's around. But, earlier in your presentation, you did talk about the exemption being arbitrary. You just mentioned that by picking a date in the 80s, that simply was a line drawn in the sand, that there's some intergenerational issues. So in my thinking is you're asking through an artist resale, because first of all, it's almost impossible to authenticate who made a piece of art in 100 years ago. I guess maybe we would just apply maybe the 70 years past the life of someone to say that they would receive some remuneration on it, but you would still have issues with authenticating who actually created a piece of art, who the money should go to if they don't have any estate or living children. And wouldn't we have the same intergenerational issues that you have right now with this other issue? It seems to me that the only way that the government could actually be able to say from this point on with a resale, we will then make sure that 5% or whatever the number ends up being will go to the artist or to their estate or to their family. How are we going to avoid the same issue?
So there are a bunch of pieces in there. First of all, the question of authentication is a question that's a practical issue, and it can be a difficult issue. But to me, it's a different issue. It's not an issue of principle that we're talking about here. Secondly, with the artist resale right. In my opinion, the absence of the artist resale right also tends to have a negative impact on older artists. To give you an example, in a lot of cases, an artist, throughout their career as it develops, they will become more well-known and their art will become more valuable. And yet, even though their art is more well-known and more valuable, they do not gain the benefit of that because it was sold 30 years ago for $20 and now it's selling for $50,000, and there are many examples in our brief, for example, that we identify. So I don't see that as being resulting in discrimination, because with the resale right, it's every artist. It's regardless of how old you are and at what point in time you create the artwork. Once it gets resold at some point down the road, according to the requirements of the proposal that we've made, then they gain something from that.
See, I have a family member who's passed away. I still have his artwork at my office. And so it's very attractive to sound to your argument. But then again, how does government institute something that is fair to everyone? And being practical is not a side issue. If you cannot practically say, this person created this piece of art at this time, and be able to then trace that back so that person is compensated, we're going to have the same issues we see with this other issue, where you're claiming there's an intergenerational unfairness when someone exhibits work that was created before the 1988 line versus after.
I don't see that as being a discriminatory problem. I mean, it could be a problem. You're correct to point out that I'm speaking for myself here, but it would seem to me that the older a piece of art is, in some cases there's going to be more difficulty with authenticating it. I understand that. But when I was talking about the exhibition right, that's a very bright line, that date in 1988. Here we're talking about a whole host of other factors that might affect the authenticity of a piece of work of art. And it's not according to a bright line in a statute that Parliament has passed. It's according to those other factors. And that's why I don't see that as being a charter offensive problem. It could still be a problem, but it's not charter offensive. I should also add, as a comment about, you referred to the government getting involved in assessing this, determining authenticity. The proposal that we've made is that the government would not be involved. It would be a copyright collective that would be involved in administrating this system.
Yeah, sir, I would just suggest CRA has had issues where people donated wonderful pieces of art and then had them priced and whatnot, and there was all sorts of issues with authenticating whether or not that was the correct price. And ultimately, you're asking government to actually enforce a policy which will benefit the artists. So I do think that it's important to know the mechanics of how this will work. Just in regards to the issue of resale, is that by doing this resale, how are people supposed to track this? For example, if I was an artist and I sold a piece to Mr. Lametti, he has great sense of artistic talent, I guess, and then in 20 years he passes away and one of his children or one of his descendants or family members has that piece of art and then sells it privately. How then am I supposed to benefit from that? Because again, it doesn't go through a brokerage house. What we are doing is we're placing an onus on the individuals that receive it. And sometimes, just like some people's where they have a grandfather or grandmother passes away with a whole gun collection, they don't know what to do with it. They don't know where it came from, and now they have all these laws and requirements they're supposed to do. So can you explain to me how government is supposed to keep your proposal consistent with its intent, but carry it out in a practical way?
Well, first of all, just to be clear again, the proposal that we've made is that government is not involved in the actual operation of the artist resale right. Secondly, the proposal that we've made does not apply to private transactions like you just mentioned. It only applies through public transactions through an auction house or a commercial gallery. And I suppose the third point I would make is that being relatively new to this, on Wednesday, representatives of CARFAC and RAV, which together represent visual artists across this country, CARFAC being outside of Quebec and RAV being within Quebec, they are making a presentation. And I would encourage you to ask the same questions of them, particularly April Britsky, who's the executive director of CARFAC. She will be in a better position to respond to them than I am.
Yeah, I do realize that, but you come towards a parliamentary committee with a suggestion, and so I would hope that you'd be able to speak to some of these things, because again, it will be the government that will have to enforce, this resale right between different brokerages and different auction houses. And I will tell you, there's a lot of issues relating to FinTrack and to all these other things, owners' rules that are thrown onto people with the best of intentions that are not always done. I would say many of these federal rules probably right now are being circumvented in large part because of the difficulty it is keeping up with them. So I respect the fact you can't speak to some of these practical concerns, and I will ask some of those questions, but it's really incumbent upon a proponent to come forward and to answer these practical questions if they want to see their proposal taken seriously.
I appreciate that, but I'll go back to the first point I made in response, which was that the inherent validity importance of the artist resale right, in my opinion, is a distinct issue from the practical problems of implementing it. And we're here to advocate for artists and the resale right.
Thank you very much. We're going to move to Mr. Lametti. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Along these lines, Mr. Yazbek, help us with define the parameters of a potential resale right. Only works of visual art. You're not extending it to books, for example,
No.
or things like that.
No.
And traditional format or also digital?
Well, that's a question that I know we had a brief discussion about that not long ago, and that's a question that one of your colleagues here mentioned, and I'm not, and I apologize for this, I'm not in a position to respond to that in any detail. I would think that it would be applicable, but practically speaking, again, I would defer to my colleague, Ms. Britsky, who's here on Wednesday.
Okay, we'll remember that. Do try to give it some thought, though.
Yes, I will.
Is there also potential, again, to respond to some of Mr. Albus's concerns? It currently is the case that you don't need, according to the Berne Convention, any formal requirement for copyright. And so for the traditional right, which is exhausted on first sale, we could probably live with that, so no registration requirement. That being said, we do have an easy place to register in CIPO, the Canadian Intellectual Property Office. Might it be part of the solution to register an artistic work in order to benefit from the right of resale?
It may be. That's something that I would certainly want to give some thought to.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Back to Ms. Sokolowski. You're well aware that the Supreme Court of Canada had pronounced on fair dealing a 9-0 decision in 2004, which made it immediately clear to the whole educational sector
Yep.
that it was quite likely that what the collective societies were doing, Access Copyright and Copyback, was actually charging for a portion of work that they actually didn't have a right to charge for because it fell within the right of fair dealing. And that actually was settled in 2012 before the Act came into place, in which, using research and private study under fair dealing, the Supreme Court of Canada held that virtually all of the copying, and Access Copyright also agreed in much of the settled part of the claim moving up to the Supreme Court of Canada, that much of the copying that was happening in the K-12 sector was in fact fair dealing. So even if we were to eliminate the word education from the Fair Dealing Act, what should we do with the Supreme Court decision?
I think that the two recommendations that I brought forward go hand in hand. So if we did exclude education from from fair dealing, then I think that we need to go back to how it was with the collective. We need to create a better mechanism that we currently had before 2012 with Access Copyright and other collectives to have Access Copyright work with the arts community to define what that needs to look like.
Well, and the educational sector, which is something that Access Copyright never wanted to do before.
Yeah, so everything I recommended is basically urging everyone to come back to the table.
What do you think we should do with very legitimate purpose of fair dealing, which is to make certain small amounts of copying available for the educational sector? There's a fair argument to say that we're just working out. We finally have come to terms with what fair dealing means over the course of a number of Supreme Court of Canada judgments, plus the 2012 changes to the Copyright Act, that this is in fact part of the spirit of the Anglo-American copyright system that we have in place in Canada, and that the most creative countries in the world, like the United States, Israel, South Korea, Singapore, all have regimes that are wider than fair dealing. They have fair use, which yes. I'll take fair use in a minute, if truth be told. There's a good argument to say that now we finally have a position where the educational sector and artists can actually work this out in good faith moving forward, perhaps even forcing some of the collectives to come along with them and along those same terms. Let's just see how it works out, because we haven't been able. It's too early to tell. There was overcharging before. There's been a reaction now. Let's see how it goes moving forward.
I think that. Well, for the example, because Access Copyright is they represent our members, so we work very closely with them. There is another side to the work that they're doing on the innovation side with blockchain technology to ensure that there is authentication with the work that, so that the resale right could potentially move forward, and there's ways to ensure that kind of information is put in place. I think that if as I said, all of these things are for all of us to come together. These recommendations I put forward to come together around the table and have these conversations so that we can work together around innovation to decide how best we can move forward. Right now, there's so much divisiveness that it's impossible. So that's what's creating the real problem, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. For the final 2 minutes, Mr. Massey.
Mr. Chair, and thank you for our witnesses. I'm still stuck on emotes. I'm thinking of copy and writing for question period, the face palm, rolling eyes, and righteous indignation. I think I could make a lot of money with those copyrights if I could. But I do want to ask you real quickly, I'm concerned about the timelines the committee has with regards to us issuing a report, it getting to the minister getting back to us, and then a potential suggested change of legislation, as you've mentioned, would require another process, and then it would have to go to the Senate. So maybe quickly, with the minute that you have left, is there anything in between to be done? Or say, for example, the Copyright Board has been one of those things. What's the low-hanging fruit to get right at it right away that wouldn't take a year plus or something that we could get done?
I think something that could easily be done is the harmonization of statutory damages. As I mentioned in my presentation, there currently other collectives such as Access Copyright can only collect the tariff. They cannot, and there is already other collective organizations such as Resound and SOCAN who have the ability to collect 3 to 10 times more. So I think that could be a quick change.
Thank you. Anybody else? No. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses.
On that note, I want to extend a gracious thank you to the panel for coming in. Merci beaucoup pour vos présentations.
Thank you very much for your presentations.
As we've been going through this for the last year, we're going to take a suspend for a quick 2 minutes, and then when we come back, we'll stay public and we'll go through your motion. All right, so we'll suspend for a quick 2 minutes. Because we're televised and somebody else needs to vote for that. Second thing is this one?
Oh, we could do that.
No, just get it out of the way.
This event?
No, this one. I just need a motion that we put the deadline for the receipt of briefs in relation to the statutory review of Copyright Act be December 10th, 2018. If we can. Okay, all those in favor? Okay, good, excellent. Got that out of the way. What's next? What else do you want?
Well, the motion.
What motion? Oh yeah. Okay, so we are. Floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just again, for the people that are watching this, The motion is specific. It says, to assist in the review of the Copyright Act, that the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology requests Ministers Freeland and Baines, alongside officials, to come before the committee and explain the impacts of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement on the intellectual property and copyright regimes in Canada. I just would like to note for members, this is an opportunity for the government to discuss, its negotiations. Obviously, this does directly impact many of the work because it does commit the country towards certain legislative changes at some point, and so certainly should be factored in with our discussions on copyright. I think that there's no time written into this, although it obviously would behoove the committee to hear it, so we can include maybe the testimony or make reference to the testimony of the ministers and the officials in the report. So I do hope that members, across the way, find that this is a reasonable suggestion. This is, again, there's a number of different changes that would be directly to our work, and this would allow the incorporation of that, and to have some accountability too, and some learning. Because if there is a movement or a particular policy that's good for Canada, it gives the opportunity to the government to be able to say why. And for us as parliamentarians who are doing a very laborious, intensive study, to be able to incorporate some of that knowledge.
Thank you very much. Mr. Longfield.
I think the intention of the motion for us to understand what's being negotiated or has been negotiated to date. It definitely has merit, but I think where we're at in terms of the deal is we now have to see what the Americans are going to come back with in terms of ratification. We have, they're going through their midterms and their 21-day review. I think there could be some impact on intellectual property and copyright as we're going through our study. I think that the timing of when we would bring some officials in for a technical briefing would have to be after we know what it is that we're talking about in terms of what is the deal. And so far, we're still going through ratification. I'd also be interested in the CPTPP, which is going back to the Senate after we vote a little bit later on this week. So there's, and we have CETA. So I think the intention of seeing what the international impacts will be, and especially with the United States, is a good intention, but I don't think we're ready. I think we should be plowing through this study we're doing until the end of the year, as we had already planned as a committee.
Thank you. Mr. Massey?
No, I think the motion is extremely reasonable and very fair. I mean, we have, first of all, a couple of things that Mr. Longfield mentioned that I can clear up is that the U.S., I was actually in Washington the day the tentative deal was done. I was I was asked by Mr. Easter for Canada-U.S. Parliamentary Association to be there with Mr. McDonald as part of a bipartisan group, the Canada delegation for the Border Trade Alliance meetings. And so it was an interesting time to be there. The process is the U.S. decided to table its text immediately. It has usually 30 days to do tabling its text to clean it up, and that's why some of the text has some errors in it where Mexico and Canada are kind of reversed a bit and so forth. But they did that so they could get into their public discussions and process, and that's what's going to go before Congress. And so that's what's in the process right now. But that's separate and independent of us. Nothing changes. Nothing can change in that process for the final deal. There can be they will present reports to Congress, and the Senate will look at it too, but nothing can change at all about the deal. So the deal is exactly how it's been tabled in the U.S., and there can be some amendments to some grammar and so forth, but nothing changes on the substance of it whatsoever. So, and even all the hearings that are happening, you saw most recently the governor of Kentucky expressing some concern and other things. Those are they get feedback essentially from the public so that Congress members have an understanding when they vote. So that's kind of the vetting that they have for it. And so I would say that what we would do here would be similar to that. We would have that type of because that is kind of their parliamentary process for vetting, is that different committees and different things will come back to the Congress for it. Whereas this is for ourselves to have the minister come forward and having a meeting on that certainly would be helpful, because it would also eliminate some of the confusion around some of the clauses that we have to decide upon in Parliament. So I would think that this is a very reasonable approach. I think it's almost unreasonable for us to continue the study without having this discussion. It gets to the point where we are reporting on something where the rules have already changed without us even having a commentary about that, which would be, quite frankly, absurd. For us to pretend that we just are going to spend a year and a half and all this public money and time on a study about something that our number one trading partner in our relationship to is so germane. And we've even had, even before this, testimony here from people talking about what the U.S. law is and the consequences on Canadian artists, cultural industries, and so forth, happening during our presentations, whether we get a deal or not. And then the deal itself may not go through this particular Congress. We don't know. There's all these things we do know. What we do know right now is that we're being asked to do a report based upon the things that are in front of us, and one of them is now this potential deal between Canada and the United States. And so I think it's a reasonable thing to have a meeting with the minister to get a lay of the land as to it, and have our report have a little bit of commentary on that. And so if we're going to have some commentary on it, I'd rather have inclusiveness of the minister, and I think it would probably provide a great opportunity for some of those questions to be clarified. I know that this doesn't include, for example, automotive, but because we're doing the study, it's very germane. And I think that's why it gives it kind of a little bit more merit in terms of there's people concerned about the politics behind this. I mean, I think that, quite frankly, we should have a separate meeting for automotive on it. I mean, I've gone through and I've had trade lawyers go through it, and there's a whole list of qualifiers in the auto, which is very complex on it. But that doesn't have anything to do with what we're having right now. We're not doing an automotive study right now. We are doing the copyright review. And we just entered into an agreement that's going to change that. And I think it would be a great opportunity for that to be part of what we submit. Because, again, I'll just finish with this, and sorry to go on, but I think it is important, is that we are going to submit something to the minister, but then he's going to then have to respond to and get something back to us and maybe do something before the Parliament ends. The timeline is constrained on that. So I think having that element as part of it would be most beneficial. Having it without it, I don't see, I think would be odd. I think it would be the first thing that somebody would say is, how did you guys actually do all this, and then pretend that the United States deal didn't happen? I mean, you'd have to, it's worse than ignoring the elephant in the room. It's basically, I don't know, the elephant dies in the room and you walk over it and basically walk through it, and it sits in the room and rots, and meanwhile, you got a deal going on. You keep talking, and you keep going forward, and you keep going, and the stink gets worse. Anyway, so anyway, one meeting would be great, I think, for it, and that's enough.
Okay. Did you have your hand up?
Well, unless someone else hasn't spoken yet.
Nope, doesn't seem like anybody is.
So again, I would just say that to reiterate some of my things my colleague has said, there has been an agreement in principle. We can't say when ratification will come from our end or the American end. However, we've made an agreement in principle with our largest trading partner and ally. So we operate more on a North American ecosystem when it comes to creativity and copyright and whatnot. And so this is going to have major impacts, and I think that our report needs to take those things into account. And I think, again, our recommendations are going to have to skate around this. Well, let's find out what the rationale was. Again, there is not a date put on this for a reason. It's a reasonable request for our study. So I just would encourage members just to allow it. I'm happy to give it to the chair. He can work with the ministers. If he wants to arrange half a meeting with one minister, another half with another, that's fine. I do think, though, it's important to have both, simply because we want to see, because ultimately Minister Baines is going to be reading our report, but Minister Freeland actually will know the rationale for why those changes were given. And let's do our jobs, and we're doing a great job on consulting with industry. Why would we not want to consult our own government?
Okay. Any other debate? Seeing no debate, we'll put it to a vote. All those... Go ahead.
Mr. Elvis?
Yes.
Mr. Chung? Yes. Mr. Diot?
Yes.
Mr. Mas?
Yes.
Mrs. Cesar Chavanes? Mrs. Kamal? Mrs. Kira? No. Mrs. Joari?
No.
Mr. Longfield? No. Mr. Sheehan? 4, 5. 4, 5 against.
4 to 5, the motion is defeated. Are there any other business?
Can I just say that I'm really happy that Mr. Sheehan didn't vote no, he voted against, because I'm going to hold the rest of them to say no to me personally.
Okay.
Just a joke, guys.
Okay, all right. It's like, is he serious or what? Is there any further business for the day? Well then, thank you very much. We will all see you guys on Wednesday. Remember, it's in room 430. 430, not at 4:30, room 430. No, at 3:30 in room 430.
Thank you.